Skyrim started my initial fascination with mead way back in 2011, at the very beginning of the game when Ralof mentions Vilod's juniper berry mead while you're being carted to Helgen, despite at the time not being of age to partake. I've now made all of the meads featured in the Elder Scrolls Cookbook on this channel, increasing the complexity of production each time with the use of green screens, cosplay elements, and inclusions of in-game lore to provide the necessary context surrounding the beverages and any quests involving the meads in question. My very first video on Vilod's mead still remains the most popular video of the series though. If that's the only one you've seen, I highly recommend checking out the other ones too, as my video production has drastically increased in quality. The Elder Scrolls Cookbook is a large collection of recipes from Tamriel, and I believe as far as fandom recipe books go, it is one of the best and most accurate ones out there. Food Theory recently did a video about the FNAF Cookbook and spoke about game recipe books being largely bare-bones cash grabs that don't take the in-game lore into account, but I don't think that's the case when it comes to this one or the Fallout one. Still. Miss you, Pat. However, despite its expansive nature, it only ends up adapting half of the meads featured in-game. The staple offerings of the two competing meaderies, namely Honningbrew and Blackbriar, the more generic Nord mead that is found virtually everywhere, and Vilod's specific recipe, which has understandably become a bit of a rarity post-Helgen. Of course, there's only so much room in a printed book, and those four are arguably the most recognizable ones, while the other four are a little more obscure, only appearing in a few key locations and quests. So I completely understand the editorial need to exclude them from the book itself. With that in mind, I would still like to explore the unfeatured meads and come up with at least semi-lore-friendly recipes for them, while also keeping the cookbook's structure in mind. I was originally going to just do one video on all of the excluded ones, but as I started mapping it out, I realized it was going to both take a lot longer and end up being way too long of a video. So, in an effort to make this a more sustainable production and get you a video sooner, let's dive in on my recipe for the first mead left out of the official cookbook, Dragon's Breath Mead. Welcome to Four Shields Tavern. Located in the quaint town of Dragon's Bridge in Haafingar Hold, it has quite the imperial presence due to its proximity to Solitude, the seat of imperial power in Skyrim. Varnius Junius returns to this tavern once he petitions the Solitude court to investigate the strange occurrences at Wolfskull Cave, and a citizen by the name of Horgeir likes to come by in the evenings to drink away his stresses. Let's go have a chat with him and see if we can't get to the bottom of his woes.
Working hard gives a man reason for drinking hard. Well, that and putting up with a wife like mine.
Hey, do you want to go grab a drink tonight?
Yeah, I just gotta go check with the old ball and chain.
Who?
My wife.
Her name's Olda. If you've met her, then you probably already know what I'm talking about.
You're engaged? Get ready for prison. Bring on the shackles.
I swear that woman is the most spiteful shrew in all of Skyrim.
Hey, guess who I hate?
Your wife?
I think there's a chunk of ice where her heart ought to be.
So, it would seem he's had some trouble with the missus. Let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this by talking to her.
Have you met my husband? Well, don't bother.
He's a drunk.
He promised me, swore on his ancestors that he'd give up the mead. And what do I find out? He's been stashing drink in a cave nearby. He even has some wolves guarding it. I swear, I should just cut out his tongue. That would be the end of it.
I could get your husband's stash for you.
If you want to try, but I'll keep my dagger sharpened just in case. You can help yourself to any drink you find, but bring me the bottle of Dragon's Breath Mead. It's his favorite, so I know he has one there.
On our way to a random cave, I guess. We have Wolfkin Alliance turned on from the Moonlight Tales mod, so because I'm a werewolf, his guard wolves aren't so great at their jobs. Sorta like if my dog Este had to guard something for me. We'll just grab the stash, and there it is. The Dragon's Breath Mead. Oops. Okay, so I've made a crucial error here and drank it. We can't finish the quest without a bottle of Dragon's Breath mead in our inventory, so let's try to figure out how to reverse engineer it. I can remember its flavor fairly well, but the game files have virtually no descriptions of production method or flavor notes. In a way, though, it means we get to take our creative liberties. If I had to create a mead called Dragon's Breath, I immediately think of fire, orange in color, smoky, and perhaps even a little spicy. I could just riff off of the Elder Scrolls Cookbook's Nord mead recipe. It uses orange zest and ginger, which would account for the color and spice element. But that might be boring to just retread a previous mead. So we're gonna take this in a different direction and consider the area surrounding Dragonbridge for inspiration. The landscape surrounding Dragon's Bridge is rather barren. There are no ingredients that immediately scream Dragon's Breath to me in this bar or in his home. However, if we head back out to Horgeir's campfire at the edge of town, we might just get a better idea of what flavors to consider. Beside the smoking fire, there are a few orange mountain flowers and even along the path up to his hidden stash. Considering the amount of time he spends at this campsite, I think we've got the smoke and color parts figured out at least. Since his bottle is the only Dragon's Breath mead available, I'm assuming he's homebrewing this particular beverage. Probably right here, since Olda wouldn't approve of doing so in the house. Some of that campfire smoke is probably imparting into his honey, so we'll want to look for one with a bit of smokiness. In my research for this video, I stumbled across another creator who's taken a pass at brewing Dragon's Breath mead, namely Method to the Meadness. He used orange blossom honey in his, and I'd like to have a little bit of that in here. To incorporate a little bit of smokiness, I want to try brewing it in tandem with another honey varietal, Guajillo honey. Not to be confused with guajillo, honey derived from apiaries near guajillo plants in South Texas and Mexico is described as a light and mild honey with a hint of pit-grilled smokiness. I thought it would hit the spot, but upon first tasting, it is light and mild, while that hint of smokiness is doing a lot of legwork in the description. To give this honey a little more smoky goodness, let's just smoke it ourselves like Horgeir would, whether he's doing so intentionally or not. I don't have a cold smoker, but I also don't want to heat up the honey too much, so I'm just going to DIY this thing and hope for the best. I started by pouring my jar into a glass tray, put that tray on a baking sheet next to a smoking box, covered it up with tinfoil, blasted some cherry wood in the smoking box with a blowtorch periodically over the course of an hour, and poured it back into the jar. For the orange color, he could be using some of the nearby orange mountain flowers to give it a flamey vibe. To get this rather generic flower into our mead, I think a combo of orange calendula flowers for a fiery orange color and elderflowers for flavor will get us just right. Rather than just chucking them into the brew though, I'll brew up a tea concentrate to add to our fermentation. I put half a cup of each flower into a liter jar, poured boiling water over everything and let it steep for 20 minutes before straining out the flowers. We were left with a tea concentrate, which was admittedly looking a little more brown than orange, but just trust the process, okay? For the spicy portion of the Dragon's Breath, there's a few things we could do to accommodate. Method to the Meadness used some black peppercorns in his recipe, but I recently heard about long pepper from a YouTube channel called Tasting History. Apparently it was incredibly popular in both ancient Rome and even medieval cuisine, and he considers it superior to regular black peppercorns. It seems to have more kick, paired with a more floral, fragrant, and even fruity aftertaste. He describes it as like regular pepper and nutmeg had a baby. Given its connections to our real-world medieval history, I think it's just what we need for our Dragon's Breath mead to give it an interesting X factor. I'll just break up 4 long peppercorns and chuck these into the brew. We'll find out if I over or under did it here, but if it's not spicy enough, we can always add more to infuse later, and if it's too much, then we technically achieved the spice, so it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. Lastly, for the yeast, I've long lamented my choice on the previous meads to use Red Star Chenin Blanc yeast, as it has too high of an alcohol tolerance and it converts almost all of the available sugars into alcohol, leaving me with drier meads than I think I'd prefer or than the good people of Tamriel are likely crafting themselves. To keep things as medieval as possible, I have chosen a Quebec yeast, specifically a Voss strain by Lallemand. Quebec is a yeast strain that was recently rediscovered in ancient Nordic farmhouses, so I'm sure our friend Horgeir would have no complaints. For our 1-gallon batch, I woke up the Quebec with some 90-degree water and pitched our brew. After giving everything a good shake, put the airlock on and waited for the magic to happen. Unfortunately, I did a few things wrong here. My scale didn't have the weight capacity to accurately measure the honey I was adding, and it froze at a certain point. So I likely added a few more grams of honey than I should have. Quebec strains also generally have a lower alcohol tolerance, so either way, we're gonna have a super sweet mead. It's just a matter of how much sweeter. Lastly, after a few days of fermenting, it started to give me some off aromas, indicating that the yeast didn't have enough of what it needs to do its thing anymore, and it was crying for help. It was starting to smell more like Dernevir's breath than Parthenax's.
Breath.
It turns out my choice to stick with ingredients local to Dragonbridge didn't really account for all the nutrients that our little yeasty friends crave, and it probably could have used some more oxygen in the primary fermentation. Apparently, all is not lost though. In an effort to save the batch, I burped the dragon and rushed to my local homebrew store to pick up some Fermaid K, an all-inclusive nutrient source that should help revive our starving little Quebec friends. I also learned that Quebec strains generally prefer to ferment at higher temperatures and can finish their primary fermentation in as little as 2 to 3 days in the right conditions. Our addition of nutrients pushed them through to finish the job. I tasted it after 2 weeks or so, and it recovered extremely well within a day of the nutrient additions. It was sweet and floral, but unfortunately lacked the smoke or much long pepper influence to speak of. If I had waited any longer on the nutrient additions, we might have been left with some longer lasting sulfuric compounds. So I'm glad I acted quickly on that, or else Olga and Horgeir might have noticed something was amiss. I decided to add a barrel aged in a bottle stave to the carboy for some toasty woody caramel and a different kind of smokiness. As seen in my all Cookbook meads compared video, those can get overpowering on anything less than a full bottle, so I think one will be just fine for us here. I also ground up 6 more long peppers to chuck into the brew and let it condition for about half a month, when I re-racked and left behind the pepper and wood. And now you're up to speed on the Dragon's Breath mead. It's much more rich in color than a standard mead. For reference, I've brewed a standard control mead with just honey, the same spring water, and Quebec yeast, Fermaid K, and clarifying agents to compare color and see the impacts of our flavoring additions. The honey used was a raw Colorado honey from Costco to keep things as neutral as possible. It'll make it easier to identify the differences provided by the orange blossom and smoked guajillo honeys on the Dragon's Breath mead and any future meads that I brew. So we'll put this into its own glass here and compare our color, aroma, flavors, etc. So, right away, next to our control, I'm sure it's apparent to you, the control mead is much clearer. The Dragon's Breath is definitely more rich and orange in color. We definitely hit the flamey color compared to a regular mead. I'm gonna set my palate with the plain mead, and then we'll jump in on the Dragon's Breath. It's got a nice farmhouse funkiness from the Quebec. It imparts a little bit of fruitiness, more interesting esters than a lot of the wine yeasts I've used, like the Chenin Blanc. It's sweet, a hint of sour, very strong apparent honey note. It's as plain as a mead can get with the influences of the Quebec. I like it, it's a good standard. But on to the hero of today's show, the Dragon's Breath mead, which, oh my gosh, that smells so good. It's hard to explain. But there is so much rich florality from the elderflower and the calendula. Honestly, it's mostly elderflower doing the heavy lifting for flavor, but I can convince myself that there's a hint of that calendula goodness in there. But calendula also doesn't really have its own smell. I actually have the jar here still, so it gets drowned out by the elderflower. But it just smells maybe close to chamomile. The florality is mostly coming from the elderflower because that's just such a distinct nose, but the calendula is still doing a little bit. You just get a hint of fruitiness from the yeast, and then I'm also presuming from our addition of the long peppercorns. And there's just a little rich peppery hint on the end. Let's taste it.
Breath.
This is so good. This might be my favorite mead I've ever brewed thus far. And that's saying a lot, because Vilod's mead is really good. This is so good though. I have rave reviews. The elderflower is still the most predominant flavor on the palate, but between the barrel stave, the peppercorn, and the smoked guajillo honey, you're getting this like light but complex, toasty, rich smokiness. It's not gonna be as intense as something like a peaty Isla Scotch or anything like that. This is like just a little toasty, charred hint. It's not too crazy. I do think I would have maybe preferred just a little bit more smokiness, so if I were to do it again, I'd probably also smoke the orange blossom honey to give it the best chance of imparting that smoky flavor, but I can still get behind this. This is still super tasty. The long pepper sort of takes over the finish. It almost feels like carbonation the way it hits your throat, but it's not. It's like a peppery bite. There's no real bubbles going on here, and I think that's fun. It does also still convey a rich spice, fruit, smoke. I cannot tell you enough how much I love this mead. No wonder Horgeir goes to such great lengths to enjoy this on his lonesome. Who knew you wouldn't have to go to some ancient Nordic ruin to learn a fire shout? You could just hit up Horgeir for a bottle of Dragon's Breath mead, because oh my gosh. Now that we've brewed and tasted this fantastic brew, I think it's safe to say that we've effectively recreated the Dragon's Breath mead, because now I have 4 bottles of it in my inventory and the quest is back on. Whew. Let's take one of our newly recrafted bottles of Dragon's Breath mead and decide who to give it to complete the quest. The quest would have us bring this back to Olda, which prompts this conversation.
Stendar's mercy to you. If my Horgeir doesn't give up the mead this time, I'll hit him over the head with it. Here, for your trouble.
However, there is a secret way to finish the quest. Instead of bringing it to his wife, we could stop by Horgeir's fire at the entrance to the town and fill him in, prompting this exchange. Olda wanted me to steal this Dragon's Breath mead.
Shore's crown, that woman never gives up.
I guess that's why I married her.
You're a real friend saving this mead from her. Here, let me show you how to block a punch that might be coming from some angry spouse, huh?
Either way, it kind of feels like we're putting ourselves in the middle of something we don't really have any business being in the middle of. I think we'll just have to play this quest and put it to a vote in the chat over on the gaming channel next week. Now that we've sampled the precious Dragon's Breath mead and potentially caused some trouble in paradise for Olda and Horgeir, I need to go hunt down some fancy apples, sweet blackberries, and fresh juniper berries for the other 3 meads found in-game, but not the cookbook.
Divines bless you. May the ground you walk quake as you pass.
So that's pretty good.
Slightly shorter beard Nick here. I had a different conclusion section initially, but it didn't quite fit the vibe and was no longer topical anyways with the inadvertent delays on this video. I really thought I'd be able to get one out per week and still think I can eventually, but it turns out that might not be feasible as early as I thought. Apparently, one production delay can sort of launch a chain reaction of subsequent delays if you don't have a backlog of content when they all take this much effort. Considering this, I'm adjusting my admittedly ambitious production schedule to a video every 2 weeks-ish until I've got a good rhythm that hopefully allows for more frequent videos. The algorithm has slowed its distribution of the Nuka-Cola Quantum video, but that video has officially passed 100,000 views. I'm still shocked by those numbers and humbled by the support on it. I promise there's more Fallout on the way soon, but the next video will be our first foray into Westeros, as I'd like to get it out while House of the Dragon is still hot off the press. If you're still watching this video, I think you'll appreciate my Renaissance Fair ensemble. While I was there, I picked up this Holy Grail-esque chalice, but right before the fair, I snagged a new apron for my opening weekend fit that will be very topical for the next mead brewing adventure in Skyrim. Speaking of, thank you to Method to the Meadness for the mead brewing content, Tasting History for introducing me to Long Pepper, and Maya and Hunter for the TikTok clips. If you liked what you saw from any of them in today's video, check them out in the description or in the info card up top. As always, a massive thank you to my patrons and YouTube members, including the noble benefactor IKnewThatWasADog. You can join the channel today right here on the YouTube app for access to exclusive perks, including some really cool ones that are coming soon that I can't talk about just yet.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Subscribe to the channel here so you don't miss what's next, the gaming channel here for the Mead stream next week, and tap here for the Mead playlist. Cheers, and see you in Westeros.
They taste doubly better when you hunted the animal yourself. So what are you guys making for dinner? Brisket and ribs, I hope. So yeah, bye guys.